So I can't do microbiology justice with development of the general theory because there's just so much. There's so much. There's no way. I mean, look how advanced this can get. There's so many different concepts and names for so many different types of tissues, so many different types of bacterias, so many different Latin conjugations for words and backgrounds for words and where these words came from. There's no way. So what I did is say, hey, listen, there's got to be a overreaching concept here that can be applied to stellar evolution inside of the theory. That's very basic, it's easy to understand, and it's never really been worked through. It's never existed because of astronomers and biologists sort of myopia. The way they think is in a box. It's like, this is microbiology, this is astronomy, this is physics, and they kind of separate all of them, that's not nature. Nature doesn't separate everything. Everything exists simultaneously in nature. That being said, I have here a paper written August 7th, 2016. Hi, Celeste. The complexity principle of microbiology and stellar metamorphosis. Now, for the new listeners here that might see this video, the first video, it's the obligatory diagram. The star is hot, big, and bright, and it cools and collapses on itself, forming more complex molecules, which then become organisms, which then become more advanced organisms. And the principle is outlined here. The microbiology of a star increases in complexity as it evolves. So if you have a young star, there's not going to be any life on it. That's obvious. Really big, really hot stars can't have life on them. That's simple. It's just too hot. Any molecule that tries to combine together would be instantly broken up again. But as the star cools, those elements can combine to make molecules, and those molecules become more complex, and they fall into the interior of the star. And this process, where the gravity allows for those energy transformations of heat production, of electricity production, of what have you, that's what makes those elements combine together and form very simple life, which then gets more and more complex as it evolves. So I have here written, is a little bit better here. In stellar metamorphosis, the microbiology of the star increases in complexity as the star evolves. For example, it goes from ionized hydrogen to hydrogen gas, which is a diatomic molecule, to amino acids, which obviously you have other elements involved, not just hydrogen, to DNA, large proteins, to flagellum, to viruses, to mycoplasmatic bacteria, to red blood cells and rod-shaped bacteria, to the nucleus of white blood cells, to amoebae, to colonial alga, and then to louse, and then even the reproductive structures of bread molds. All the while, the biological characteristics become more and more complex, leading up to much larger organisms composed of trillions of symbiotic, pathogenic, and other types of microbiological structures. It should be noted that life itself rests on the structures and processes of the smallest of organisms. Yes, we're composed of trillions of cells all working together to make us alive. It's just absolutely incredible, the miracle of life. And the miracle of life is a byproduct of stellar evolution. According to this principle and the astrochemical principle, it just increases in complexity as the star evolves. And this goes hand in hand with Darwin's theory of natural selection. Is over extreme amounts of time, the life becomes more complex as the star evolves itself. In other words, not only is its stellar evolution becoming a planet, which is a much more ancient star, the life evolves alongside the star's evolutionary sequence. They evolved together. It's not an independent process. It isn't the Earth formed, okay, and then life sprung up on it by a miracle, which is the basic attitude of modern astronomers and biologists. What actually happened is that the Earth was vastly different. The Earth also evolved from much simpler times. These are primitive Earths, very primitive. And the most evolved structures in the universe that are very large, like the Earth, and that are still, geologically active and have, internal heat production, and the atmosphere is right and the pressures are right, will have life on it. And that's a question that a lot of astronomers these days, they need to come to terms with, because we're living in a universe that's full of life. There's life all over the place. And a lot of it's extremely evolved, and a lot of it's very technologically evolved as well. Which is also one of those things that a lot of astronomers have to come to terms with, the fact that, their SETI organization, which, from Stanton T. Friedman's standpoint, is the acronym for silly effort to investigate. But anyways, I have here, this means that life will be found on older stars, and depending on how evolved the star is, it can be determined how evolved the life will be, and vice versa. If it is composed of completely ionized material like the sun, then it is really young. And if it has people like us, then chances are the star is really old. So, yeah, if we come in contact with people like us, similar to us, chances are very likely they came from an extremely evolved object, which isn't too much of a stretch to imagine. But it's too much of a stretch for some people in academia to imagine, because they don't want to be considered as, a crazy person. But we all know that it's here. The question now is why. But anyways, and I have here on a side note, if the star is still a water world, the majority of the life will probably be microbial and not evolved to the point of forming large organisms yet, such as fish and the like. It says here, fish and highly evolved aquatic creatures and plants would only be apparent much later during the stages of an ocean world. Basically, there are young, middle-aged, and old ocean worlds. And it's very important to understand too, just because somebody says ocean world, or just because I have the concept of ocean world here, doesn't mean that there's just this ladder and you take a step down the ladder and boom, it's ocean world, and there's another step down the ladder and boom, it's no longer ocean world. No, it's a smooth continuum. There are ocean worlds that are much older than other ocean worlds, and the thicknesses of their oceans is also different. We have a universe that's full of variation in that way. There are some ocean worlds, like my previous talk, that are heavier than Neptune. Okay, and the ocean mass is like 38 times the entire mass of the Earth, which is absolutely incredible. And then you have very, 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 very old ocean worlds like Earth, which are 4.5 billion plus years old, where the ocean is just like a couple mile thick layer, which is a very thin layer that covers around 66% of the surface. But anyways, yeah, it says here, fish would most likely begin forming and swimming around during the middle to late stages. So young ocean worlds, mostly microbial life, more likely. As well, it means that dinosaurs probably came to be after fish, as the oceans were beginning to thin considerably and had large masses that were covered in shallow pools, as opposed to the deep oceans with basaltic floors. And I have here, dinosaurs in that sense were semi-aquatic, which would explain their huge masses on par with whales of modern times. And I have here, Brian J. Ford is probably right, and I have a link to his ideas there. Brian J. Ford said, the masses of dinosaurs was so huge because of simple buoyancy. They weren't land walkers. They didn't only walk on land as portrayed in a lot of Hollywood movies and in science textbooks. The fact is that they were semi-aquatic. They were walking in huge, shallow pools that covered enormous areas. And the buoyancy of that water can make it to where they were just absolutely massive. And I mean, it's easy to imagine like a brachiosaurus, the ones with long necks. It's easy to imagine one of those big boys wading through a large, shallow pool with its neck sticking out. It's easy to imagine. It's not that hard, so I don't know why they don't look at that as being possible. As well, look at the Tyrannosaurus. Those little, tiny arms. If one of those mamma jammas just fell over and there was no buoyancy to pop him back up, that'd be a death sentence. I guess if you fall down, you can't push yourself back up off the ground, you're kind of stuck. But if you're in water, you don't have to worry about falling over. You just kind of stay above that. Anyways, all right, I think I made this video long enough. This paper was written 4 years ago. It's crazy. It's already been 4 years since this paper is written, and not a peep from the academics about this issue. I guess they haven't seen it, or they're keeping silent. I don't know what's going on. This is common knowledge now from my circles and from me. All right, y'all. Later.